So the next one we'll talk about is keeping API tokens alive, because nobody likes an expired token. Next slide, please. So the problem we've seen come up again and again is API tokens expire after 30 days of inactivity, which is great from a security perspective, so they can't be maliciously used if they're no longer needed. But sometimes there is a legitimate reason to have an API token around for longer than 30 days of inactivity. Specifically, the one we've seen is there's an API token that's used to integrate Okta with a SIM so that you can do alerting and reporting on particular suspicious events. And if that token is expired, it requires human intervention to recreate the token, which no one likes to get that call at 2 in the morning. I'm sure we've all been there. And of course, that the API token will temporarily break your integration until you have that human intervention. So what we've done for clients that have run into that situation is use workflows to automate the token refresh. Next slide, please. So yeah, again, just using Okta workflows to automatically refresh the token. Next slide. And I will pass it back to Tony to show us how that's done.
Thanks, Tracy. So I'm just going to show you the API screen within our Okta tenant. You see, I've got this API token, and it was last used just earlier today, and it's going to expire in 30 days at this time. I think this is Pacific time. So the way I'm going to refresh that token is to use that API token to call the get current users API, which will return just the current user on that API token. Okay, so I'm just going to create another child flow. I'm going to pass in a URL and API key that correspond. So the URL corresponds to my Okta URL, and then the API token is of course the API token that I want to refresh. So to make the call to this API endpoint, I need to pass in. It's going to be a GET request where I need to pass in 3 items in the header, and then pass it, and then make a GET call to that URL with API v1 users meet. So I'm going to do all that in Okta workflows. So first I'm going to create 2 compose cards to create the text that I need. So the first one is going to be that URL API endpoint. It's going to be API v1 users meet. Just going to rename that postcard to URL. Another compose card for the authorization. It's going to be SSWS space my API key. Save. I'm going to call this in get current user. Turn on my flow so in case I forget later. Then, so to create that header, I'm going to use an object construct. I'm going to pass in, so the first item in that is application. Oh, wait. Application. Oh, accept. Sorry. Install. going to be application JSON. Next one is content type. Next one is authorization. It's going to be this API key. Oh, I think I spelled that wrong. Now I've got my header created. I'm going to invoke my API endpoint with HTTP request. I'm going to use a GET request. So the URL was constructed in this compose card. Drag it over to URL. Don't need a query. The header will be this object that I just constructed. Yeah. So I'll click save, and I can actually test this out right now. Just pass in the URL of my tenant, then my API key, and I run test. Got status code 200, which is good. And then I check the body. Notice that got the current user, which is myself, because I created that API token. Now, if I go back to my API tokens UI and my Okta tenant, and I refresh, I'll hopefully see this timestamp update to like probably 145 or thereabouts. And there it is. I've refreshed my token with Okta workflows. So to keep my tokens alive, I'm going to call that that child flow that I created on a scheduled event. So I'm going to create a new flow and use the schedule. And because the tokens expire every 30 days, I'll need to do it at least once every 30 days. So probably once a week would be good. So I'll just make it Sunday at 9 a.m. and make it, I'll pick Edmonton, because that's where I live. So I click save, call this tokens alive. Turn on flow. So I've already, so what I've already done beforehand is create a table of Okta API keys. So you'll see that this table has a URL column and then an API key column. So I've got my TechJutsu Okta preview tenant there with the API key, but you'll also notice I've got my this dev tenant of mine with an API key that I can also keep those tokens alive, because I'm actually using the HTTP GET request and not any kind of built-in connector between the same Okta tenant. It actually this keep alive using that HTTP GET request isn't dependent on any existing connections between the actual Okta tenant. You can just hook up to any Okta tenant as long as you have a valid API key. Okay, so back to my flow. I need to read that table that I just showed. So if I go to the table flow, I want search rows, which will, and I choose that Okta API keys table. Then for the result set, I want all matching rows. And I don't actually need any inputs because I'm just going to get every single row. And then the output doesn't matter. I can take all the data that it gives me back. So now if I run a test, you'll see that it returned all the rows of that table. I go back to my flow. So now what I need to do is just like the previous flow, we need to do a for each. Pass in my rows, and then I'm going to run that invoke get current user flow that I just created. And this one takes in a URL and API key, so I got to specify what I want to pass in for each. So so as each item in that list, it contains an object with all these different attributes. I'm going to pass in the URL for the URL parameter, and then for API key, I'll pass in API key. I click save. So if I click test, it should pull in all the rows of the table, and then run a for each on the resulting rows, and then it'll call my invoke get current user flow, and then refresh each token by calling get current user. So if I go back to my TechJutsu tenant, refresh, should say like 150 for expiry time now, or 149. You can go, then I'll go to my dev tenant here.
And that's his real motorcycle for anyone who's wondering.
Oh, admit. Security, API tokens. So here's my test token with a 149 where it was just refreshed or there. So to recap, we created an Okta scheduled flow that would read a table with predefined values for URL and API key called a list for each. On that, to call my invoke get current user child flow, and then it created the necessary headers and authorization and the URL. Then it used the HTTP get card to refresh the token to keep your token alive. So yeah, that's pretty much all the demos that I wanted to show. There any questions?
I do have a question, Tony, an excellent demo, by the way. How would you, let's say if you're working on one of these workflows and you wanted to use another tenant, how would you be able to transfer them in them? Or is there a way to export them somehow?
Yeah, great question, Elliot. Yeah, so if you wanted to export a single flow, you can just go to find the flow that you're interested in, and there's a gear icon, and you can, there's a export, and then just click download. Then it downloads it into a, I think it's a JSON file. Let's see. Yeah, so it's this big JSON file.
And then I would just go ahead and import that, right?
Yeah. So I can quickly show you on like, let's see, if I go to different Okta tenant, this is our TechJutsu production tenant. Just give me a minute to log in there.
Notice the password was log in there.
Go to workflows. So if I create a new folder, I go import. I can drop that. Oh, this one actually had to. So what I had to do, because that one called another flow, I should have probably imported the folder instead, or exported the folder instead. So if I go back to not this one. So what I needed to do was export my folder of flows. I've got a temp Tony demo folder. I'll go back here. See if this works.
Quick question while it's loading. So you showed us a great example how to extend it, but is there a way to build a workflow to invalidate token particular based on the suspicious activity or some particular attributes? Again, like IP addresses or some different type of client or something that user might point to the fact that somebody else is trying to access using the token. Thank you.
Like invalidate a token. Let's see. Let's see if there's a way to see if I create a new flow. I'm not sure if there's activate user. Don't see anything. So there's no built-in API to do that. You have to check the Okta. If there's an Okta API to do that, like to pull the API token, you could call that to potentially revoke a token. You have to check. So if there's an Okta API that you could call, then you could invoke an API to do that.
Yeah, and then build the workflow around it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Thanks.
We're looking to do these educational meetups once a month. So if anyone has a particular topic you'd like us to cover, we're open to suggestions. Some things we were thinking about is extending the power of Okta second factor to the call center. So when a user calls into a call center, instead of being asked security questions, you could just push a notification to their phone to their Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, or Okta Verify. We're also thinking of doing one on the various passwordless options. But if the group has any suggestions or anything that you're burning to learn about, we're happy to take requests.
I have a question. Is there a way to do a workflow that would delete a suspended or deactivated account after a certain, a certain amount of time?
Yeah, you could do something like, so you could have an event that if someone was suspended or deactivated, you could add them to a table, and then with the date that they were added, and then you'd create some kind of scheduled flow that would read that table and then, do the math to figure out if it's been 30 days since the user was added there. And then if you need to check other things, you can do that within your flow and then take appropriate action like delete or whatever afterwards.
Okay. Is there a way to, is there an API, like a command line API into Okta that we could just, script something to just delete it?
So, workflows can do a lot of that with the built-in connector. Like if you see the Okta card, you can activate users, deactivate users, delete users, and even suspend and unsuspend as needed. If are you talking about scripting outside of workflows?
Just whatever is easier. Basically, we we delete our AD accounts when users leave, and they have a tendency of getting hired again relatively quick. And then when they do, the account gets reactivated, or it tries to reactivate, but that suspended account comes into conflict because the primary, the new account that's created doesn't have the same UID or GUID or whatever it is that you guys go by. And so we have to go there and manually delete those and then, run a sync again. So yeah, just to be able to avoid having to go through that process. So that's fine. If, I just want to, whatever's easier. But, if workflows is the easiest way, then I guess we'll look into that. Yeah, I see that you could easily, set it so that it deletes something after a certain amount of inactivity. But then, we got people who aren't going to use Okta for a year. I had one guy who, hadn't used it in forever. He got set up for it, but he just started using it today. So I wouldn't want him to get nixed. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want us to dig into that more, I'll put my email address in the chat, and if you send me an email with your contact information, we can dig into that a little bit more for you.
We have his contact. That's Kevin from SPI.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Again.
So I missed most of your presentation. My screensaver kicked in and I could not break out of it. So I heard you talk the whole time, but I couldn't see anything. So I had to force reboot my machine and get back on. So yeah, I missed a good portion of that. Would it be like for future ones, would it be okay if we record these sessions or?
Yeah, so I am recording. Apologies, I started the recording a little bit late, but we're going to get Chelsea afterwards to sort of chunk them up and do, each demo so they're a bit smaller, and we'll put them on our YouTube channel. And we can,
Okta themselves also has lots of material like on YouTube and even on their training site on workflows. So if you want more information, it's all out there already.
Okay.
And we also have, if we can just bring up the slide, Tony, TechJutsu Tuesdays. So if you want to come, we have sort of open office hours to ask us any questions you like. And they're on our events page on our techjutsu.ca/events.
Yeah, and you can scan the QR code, takes you right to the events page, and you can sign up that way too. So
I'll put my email in the chat if anyone has any further questions. Please feel free to reach out to myself or Tony. And thanks for attending our first session.